The blood came first, warm and frightening, pooling beneath her as the wagon lurched over another rut in the endless Oklahoma prairie. And Katherine Zimmerman knew with absolute certainty that her baby was coming now, miles from anywhere, with only the merciless August sun as witness to her terror. Her husband had been dead 3 weeks, trampled by a spooked horse outside their homestead, leaving her alone with debts she could not pay and a baby she could not birth without help. The banker in Oklahoma City had given her until the end of the month to vacate the property, and Katherine had packed everything she owned into this borrowed wagon, determined to reach her sister in Texas before the child arrived. But babies kept their own schedule, indifferent to plans or desperations, and hers had decided that this desolate stretch of land between nowhere and nothing was the perfect place to enter the world. She pulled the horses to a stop, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the reins. The contractions had been mild that morning, easy to ignore, easy to convince herself they meant nothing. Now they seized her with such violence that she cried out, alone in the vastness, her voice swallowed by the hot wind that swept across the grassland. She managed to climb into the back of the wagon, her skirts already soaked, and lay down among the few possessions she had left, a quilt beneath her that had been her grandmother's, now ruined. The pain came in waves that left her gasping, and time lost all meaning. The sun moved across the sky, indifferent, and Katherine labored alone, terrified and weeping, calling out for her dead husband, for her mother who had died when she was 12, for anyone who might hear. But the prairie was empty, had always been empty, would always be empty, and she was alone with her agony and her fear. She did not know how many hours passed. The sun was lower when she heard the hoofbeats, and she was too weak by then to feel anything but a distant relief that at least her baby would not be alone when she died. Because she was dying, she was certain of it. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the blood would not stop. The wagon rocked as someone climbed up beside her, and through her haze of pain, Katherine saw a man's face, sun-darkened and worried, with eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore a dusty brown hat and a faded blue shirt, and his hands, when they touched her forehead, were surprisingly gentle. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice that made you believe things might turn out all right even when they clearly would not. "The baby," Katherine managed to whisper. "Please, the baby. I know, I see it. I am going to help you." He did not tell her his name, and she did not ask, because another contraction seized her and she screamed beyond shame, beyond anything but the need to survive this. The cowboy, for that was clearly what he was, moved with quick efficiency, rolling up his sleeves, positioning himself where he needed to be. "You are doing fine," he told her, though she knew she was not. "The baby is coming. When I tell you to push, you push as hard as you can." Katherine obeyed because there was nothing else to do, and when he said push, she pushed with what little strength remained in her body. The world narrowed to pain and effort, and the cowboy's voice, steady and encouraging, telling her she was strong, she could do this, just a little more. And then, impossibly, the baby was there, sliding into the world and into the cowboy's waiting hands, a tiny creature covered in blood and vernix, frighteningly still for one terrible moment before it let out a thin, angry wail that was the most beautiful sound Katherine had ever heard. "A boy," the cowboy said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a son, madam." Katherine tried to lift her arms to take her child, but they would not obey. Her whole body felt strange, distant, as though she were floating somewhere above herself. She could see the baby, see the cowboy wrapping him in what looked like his own spare shirt, but she could not move, could not reach for him. "I cannot," she whispered, tears sliding down her temples. "I cannot hold him." The cowboy's face changed, became more focused. He tied off the cord with practiced hands, cut it with a knife he sterilized in the flame of a match. And then he lifted the baby, still crying, and brought him close to Catherine's face. He knelt beside her in the cramped wagon, cradling the infant with surprising tenderness, angling him so Catherine could see every detail of that tiny, wrinkled face. "He is perfect," the cowboy said softly. "Look at him. He has your nose." Catherine stared at her son through tears, memorizing his face, certain these would be her last moments. "Please," she managed, "do not let him be alone." "You are not dying," the cowboy said firmly, "but you have lost too much blood and you need a doctor. Where were you headed?" "Texas." "My sister." "That is too far. Oklahoma City is closer, maybe 8 miles south. I am going to take you there now." Catherine wanted to protest that she could not be moved, that she needed to rest, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision, and she did not have the strength for words. She felt the cowboy lay the baby beside her, tucked carefully into the crook of her arm, though she still could not move to hold him. Then the wagon shifted as the cowboy climbed into the driver's seat, and they were moving, faster than was probably safe, the wheels clattering over the uneven ground. The baby stopped crying, perhaps lulled by the motion, and Catherine turned her head just enough to see him. His eyes were closed, his miniature fists curled near his face, and he was so small, so impossibly fragile. She had carried him for 9 months, felt him move inside her, dreamed about him, and now here he was, real and breathing and utterly dependent on her, and she could not even lift him. The ride to Oklahoma City passed in a blur of consciousness and darkness. Catherine drifted, aware of the movement of the baby's warmth beside her, of the cowboy's voice occasionally calling back to ask if she was still awake. She tried to answer, managed small sounds that seemed to satisfy him, and held on. Oklahoma City, in 1891, was not much of a city, more a collection of buildings struggling to justify their optimism. But it had a doctor, and that was all that mattered. The cowboy pulled the wagon right up to a white house with a painted sign that read Dr. Samuel Harrison, and then he was there beside Catherine again, lifting the baby with careful hands, wrapping him more securely. "Stay with me, madam," he said. "We are here. You are going to be all right." Then there were other voices, other hands, and Catherine was lifted and carried. And the last thing she saw before the darkness finally claimed her was the cowboy standing in the doorway with her son in his arms, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. She woke to dim lamplight and the smell of clean sheets. The room was small, unfamiliar, with whitewashed walls and a single window that showed darkness beyond. For a moment, Catherine could not remember where she was or how she had gotten here, and then it all came rushing back, the blood, the pain, the baby. The baby. She tried to sit up, and a sharp pain in her abdomen stopped her. A woman appeared at her side, middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Easy now, dear. You are all right, but you must not move too quickly." "My baby," Catherine said, her voice hoarse. "Where is my baby? He is fine, healthy, and eating well." "Mr. Mackenzie has been taking care of him." "Who?" "The man who brought you in, Franklin Mackenzie. He has barely left the house since yesterday." "Yesterday?" Catherine's mind struggled with that. "How long have I been asleep?" "Nearly 20 hours. You lost a great deal of blood, but Dr. Harrison says you will recover with rest. Now let me get your son. I imagine you are eager to hold him." The woman disappeared and returned a moment later with the baby, now clean and wrapped in a proper blanket, sleeping peacefully. She placed him in Catherine's arms, and this time Catherine's body obeyed, her arms coming up to cradle him, her hands working even though they trembled with weakness. "Hello," she whispered to her son. this person she had made, this miracle. He stirred at her voice, his mouth working in his sleep, and Katherine felt something fierce and overwhelming sweep through her, a love so immediate and consuming that it frightened her with its intensity. The door opened quietly and the cowboy appeared, looking tired and rumpled, his hat in his hands. He stopped when he saw her awake and something like relief crossed his face. "Madam," he said, "it is good to see you conscious." "You saved us," Katherine said simply. "Both of us." "I do not know how to thank you." Franklin Mackenzie shook his head. "No thanks necessary. I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Katherine said. "Most men would have ridden on." He had no answer to that, just stood there turning his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. The woman who had brought the baby, who Katherine now understood must be the doctor's wife, smiled at them both. "I will leave you to talk. Mrs. Zimmerman, call if you need anything." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Franklin moved closer, his eyes on the baby. "He is doing well. Mrs. Harrison found a woman in town who just weaned her own child and had milk to spare. He took to her right away." "What is your name?" Katherine asked. "Your full name, I mean." "Franklin Mackenzie. I work for the Boxham Ranch, about 15 miles north of here." "I am Katherine Zimmerman." "This is my son." She paused, realizing she had not yet named him, that she had been so certain she would die that she had not thought beyond survival. Thomas David Zimmerman, after my father and my husband." "That is a good name," Franklin said. He seemed to hesitate, then asked, "Your husband died 3 weeks ago. A horse spooked and trampled him. We had a homestead, but I could not manage it alone, not with the baby coming and the debts he left behind. I was trying to reach my sister in Texas when Thomas decided to arrive early." Franklin absorbed this information quietly. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." Katherine looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. "I thought we were both going to die out there, if you had not come along when you did." "I was riding back from delivering some horses to a buyer in Guthrie. I almost took the main road instead, but something made me go the long way." He smiled slightly. "I suppose Thomas had plans." They fell into silence, not uncomfortable but thoughtful, and Katherine studied the man who had pulled her son into the world. He was probably in his late 20s, with brown hair that needed a cut and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn but clean, and there was a steadiness about him, a quiet competence that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her husband died. "How long does the doctor say I need to stay here?" she asked. "At least a week, maybe 2. "You are very weak still, Mrs. Zimmerman. You cannot travel." Katherine felt panic rise in her chest. "I cannot afford to stay here that long. I have no money for a doctor or a room." "It is taken care of," Franklin said quickly. "By whom?" He looked uncomfortable again. "By me." "Do not worry about it, Mr. Mackenzie. I cannot let you do that. You have already done so much. Mrs. Zimmerman, you nearly died. You need time to heal, and your son needs his mother to be strong. Let me do this, please." There was something in his voice, an earnestness that made Katherine wonder about him, about why a cowboy would spend his wages on strangers. But she was too tired to argue, and the truth was she had no choice. Her pride would have to bend to necessity. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will find a way to repay you." "Not necessary," Franklin said, but he looked pleased that she had accepted. Thomas began to fuss, his face scrunching up in preparation for a cry, and Katherine instinctively brought him closer, though she had no idea what to do. Franklin stepped forward. "He is probably hungry. Would you like me to fetch Mrs. Harrison?" "Yes, please." He left quickly, returning with both Mrs. Harrison and a younger woman Katherine had not seen before, a girl of perhaps 20 with dark hair and a baby of her own on her hip. "This is Mary Collins, Mrs. Harrison said. "She has been nursing young Thomas for you." Mary smiled shyly. "He is a good eater, madam. No trouble at all." Katherine watched as Mary settled into a chair and began to nurse Thomas, feeling a complicated mix of gratitude and inadequacy. She should be the one feeding her child, but her milk had not come in yet. And even if it had, she was still so weak that she could barely hold him for more than a few minutes. Franklin had retreated to stand by the window, giving them privacy, his back turned. Katherine watched him, wondering about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even had time to voice. The next few days passed in a slow rhythm of sleeping and waking, of holding Thomas when she had the strength and watching others care for him when she did not. Franklin came every day, sometimes staying for hours, helping with small things, fetching water, holding Thomas while Katherine ate the meals Mrs. Harrison insisted she finish. He was gentle with the baby, surprisingly comfortable handling something so small and fragile, and Katherine found herself watching him with a curiosity that felt dangerous. She should not be noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at Thomas. She should not be aware of how his voice dropped into a softer register when he spoke to the baby. She should certainly not be feeling a warm flutter in her chest when he turned that gentle expression on her. Her husband had been dead less than a month. It was too soon, too wrong, to be feeling anything for another man. But grief was a strange companion, and Katherine had learned in these past weeks that it did not follow the rules people wanted to impose on it. She had loved David Zimmerman, had mourned him, would always carry sadness for his too short life. But she was also 22 years old with a newborn son and no home and no prospects, and Franklin Mackenzie made her feel safe in a world that had proven itself terrifyingly unsafe. On the 5th day, Katherine was finally strong enough to walk around the room, and on the 6th, she made it downstairs for dinner, leaning heavily on Mrs. Harrison's arm but upright and mobile. Franklin was there, as he had been every evening, and his face lit up when he saw her. "You look much better," he said, standing quickly to pull out a chair for her. "I feel almost human again," Katherine said, settling carefully into the seat. Thomas was asleep upstairs, and for the first time since his birth, Katherine felt like more than just a collection of exhausted parts held together by determination. "Over dinner, Doctor." Harrison and his wife kept the conversation light, talking about the town's preparations for the upcoming Harvest Festival, about the new schoolteacher who had arrived from Boston and was scandalized by everything, about the weather and crops and all the small concerns of daily life. Katherine listened, grateful for the normalcy of it, for the reminder that the world kept turning even when your own life had been upended. After the meal, Franklin asked if she would like to sit on the porch for a while, and Katherine agreed, eager for fresh air after days confined to bed. The evening was cooling down after another scorching day, and the sky was turning that particular shade of purple that only seemed to exist out west. They sat in the 2 rocking chairs that flanked the front door, not speaking at first, just absorbing the peace of twilight. Finally, Franklin broke the silence. "Have you given thought to what you will do, after you are well enough to leave here, I mean?" Katherine had been trying not to think about it. "I suppose I will continue on to Texas, to my sister. I have nowhere else to go. What is waiting for you there?" "My sister married a rancher. They have a place outside San Antonio. She wrote after David died and said I was welcome to come, that they could use help around the house." Katherine paused. "I think she meant it kindly, but I know what it means. I will be an extra mouth to feed, a widow with a child and no prospects. They will take me in out of obligation, and I will spend my life being grateful for their charity." "You do not sound enthusiastic about the arrangement." "I am grateful," Katherine said quickly. Truly, I am. But I also know what it is to be dependent on others' kindness. It is not a comfortable position. Franklin rocked slowly, his gaze on the darkening street. Can I tell you something, Mrs. Zimmerman? Please call me Katherine. After everything we have been through together, formality seems unnecessary. He smiled at that. Katherine, then, and you should call me Franklin or Frank, which is what most people use. All right, Frank. I have been thinking, he said slowly, as though choosing his words carefully, about your situation and about mine. I have been working at the Boxham for 6 years now, saving every penny I could. I have enough put aside to buy my own place, a small ranch that is up for sale about 20 miles from here. Good land, good water, a decent house that needs some fixing up but is solid. I was planning to make an offer on it this fall. Katherine listened, unsure where this was going. The thing is, Franklin continued, a ranch is a lot of work for one man. I would need help, someone to manage the house, to handle the garden and the chickens, to keep the accounts. And I have been watching you with Thomas these past days, seeing how you are with him even though you are still recovering, and I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Frank, what are you saying? He turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. I am saying that I could offer you something different than charity, a partnership of sorts. If you married me, the ranch would be ours, and Thomas would have a home and a father who would treat him as his own. You would not be dependent on anyone's kindness. You would be a full partner in building something that belongs to both of us. Katherine stared at him, shocked into silence. Marriage. He was proposing marriage. I know it is sudden, Franklin said quickly. And I know you are still grieving your husband. I am not asking you to love me, Katherine. I am asking you to consider a practical arrangement that would benefit us both. I need help building a life, and you need a life to build. We could help each other. You do not know anything about me, Katherine managed to say. I know you were brave enough to try to reach Texas alone while 9 months pregnant. I know you fought to bring Thomas into the world even when you thought you were dying. I know you have not once complained about your circumstances, even though you have every right to. That is enough for me to know. Frank, this is crazy. People do not get married like this. People get married for practical reasons all the time out here. Love is a luxury. Survival is a necessity. I think we could make it work. Katherine's mind was reeling. Marriage to a man she had known for less than a week. It should have been absurd, impossible to consider. But as she sat there in the cooling evening, she found herself actually thinking about it, weighing the options. A life in Texas as the grateful recipient of her sister's charity, always secondary, always dependent. Or a life here, building something with a man who had already proven himself kind and capable and trustworthy. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that there are options beyond Texas. They sat in silence for a while longer, and then Thomas's cry drifted down from the upstairs window, and Katherine excused herself to go to her son. As she climbed the stairs, her legs still shaky but getting stronger each day, she turned Franklin's proposal over in her mind. The truth was, there was something appealing about the idea, something that went beyond practicality. She liked Frank. She enjoyed his company, felt comfortable with him in a way that surprised her given how little time they had known each other. He was good with Thomas, patient and gentle, and he made her laugh with his dry observations about the town's various characters. But could she really marry him? Bind her life to his on the basis of a few days' acquaintance and a mutual need for partnership? Mary Collins was in the room when Katherine entered, rocking a fussing Thomas. She handed him over with a smile, and Katherine settled into the chair by the window to hold her son. He rooted against her hopefully, and Katherine felt the familiar pang of inadequacy that her body still was not producing milk reliably. "Mrs. Harrison says it can take time, especially after a difficult birth," Mary offered, as if reading her thoughts. "You should not worry so much." "Does everyone in this town read minds?" Katherine asked, but she was smiling. Mary laughed. "Small town. Not much else to do but pay attention to each other. Besides, Mr. Mackenzie has been asking questions, wanting to make sure you have everything you need. It is sweet, really." "He asked me to marry him," Katherine heard herself say, and then immediately wished she could take it back. But Mary did not look shocked, just thoughtful. "Are you going to say yes?" "I do not know. Is that insane? To even consider it," Mary shrugged. "My parents arranged my marriage when I was 16. I met my husband the day before our wedding. We have been married 4 years now, and I love him dearly. It was not love at first sight, but it grew into love. I think that happens more often than people admit. But what if it does not grow? What if we are just two people stuck together who made a mistake? Then you would be like half the married couples in any town," Mary said pragmatically. "But I do not think that will happen. I have seen the way Mr. Mackenzie looks at you. He might say it is a practical arrangement, but there is more there than practicality." Katherine looked down at Thomas, now contentedly gnawing on his fist. "What if I am betraying David's memory? Your husband would want you and his son to be safe and cared for. That is not betrayal. That is survival, and there is no shame in choosing to survive." After Mary left, Katherine sat for a long time with Thomas, watching the stars appear one by one outside her window. She thought about David, about the life they had planned and lost. She thought about her sister in Texas, about being a permanent guest in someone else's home. And she thought about Frank, about the steadiness in his eyes, about the careful way he held Thomas, about the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what had been. By the time she laid Thomas in the small cradle Mrs. Harrison had provided, Katherine had made her decision. She found Frank the next morning on the front porch, apparently waiting for her. He stood when she stepped outside, his expression hopeful and anxious in equal measure. "I have thought about your proposal," Katherine said without preamble, "and I have some conditions." Hope flared in his eyes. "I am listening." "First, this must be a real marriage. I will not be a housekeeper you are legally bound to. We will be partners in everything, equal partners. You will consult me on decisions about the ranch, and I will have a say in how our life is built." "Agreed," Frank said immediately. "Second, you will treat Thomas as your own son, not as a favor to me, but truly as your child." "I already think of him that way," Frank said quietly. "That is an easy promise to make. Third, I need time. I know you said this is practical, but I need time to adjust to the idea of being married again. To being married to you, I need you to be patient with me." "I can be patient," Frank said. "Katherine, I meant what I said. I am not expecting you to love me immediately. I am hoping that over time we will build something together that is worth more than just practicality. But I am willing to wait for that." Katherine took a deep breath. "Then yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Frank's face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. He stepped forward and took her hands in his, careful and respectful, his calloused palms warm against her skin. "You will not regret this," he said. "I promise you, Katherine. I will do everything in my power to make sure you and Thomas have a good life." "I believe you," Katherine said, and realized it was true. They were married 5 days later in Dr. Harrison's parlor, with the doctor and his wife as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Harrison had altered to fit her, and she held Thomas throughout the brief ceremony, unwilling to put him down even for this. Frank stood beside her in his cleanest shirt and his only suit jacket, looking nervous and solemn and hopeful all at once. The minister who performed the ceremony was an elderly man with kind eyes who did not ask uncomfortable questions about their whirlwind courtship. He pronounced them husband and wife, and Frank kissed her cheek gently, respectfully, a promise of patience kept. Afterward, there was a small celebration with cake that Mrs. Harrison had baked and coffee that was too strong but welcome. Mary Collins was there with her husband and baby, and several townspeople who Katherine had not met but who seemed genuinely happy for them. It was nothing like Katherine's first wedding, which had been a big affair with her whole family present and dancing that lasted until midnight. But it felt right in its own way, this small gathering of people who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. That evening, Frank drove Katherine and Thomas out to the Boxham ranch to collect his belongings and give notice. The ranch foreman, a weathered man named Samuel Briggs, seemed genuinely sorry to lose Frank but congratulated him heartily on his marriage and his plans. "Always knew you would make something of yourself, Mackenzie," Samuel said, shaking Frank's hand firmly. "You have the grit for it. Come back and visit sometime. Let us know how that piece of land is treating you." They spent the night in Frank's small room in the bunkhouse, Katherine and Thomas in the narrow bed while Frank slept on the floor with a bedroll. It was strange and awkward, this new arrangement, but Frank was true to his word about patience. He gave her space, did not push, seemed content to let things develop naturally. The next morning they set out for the property Frank intended to buy. It was a beautiful late August day, the heat tempered by a breeze that carried the scent of dry grass and wildflowers. Thomas slept in a basket at Katherine's feet, rocked by the motion of the wagon, while Frank pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. The ranch, when they reached it, was smaller than Katherine had expected but lovely in its simplicity. The house was built of weathered wood with a wide front porch, and there was a barn that needed some repairs, a well with a solid pump, and pasture land that stretched toward rolling hills in the distance. The previous owners had moved to California to be near their daughter, and the place had sat empty for several months, but it had good bones, Frank said, running his hand along the porch railing. It just needed people to bring it back to life. Katherine walked through the house while Frank waited outside with Thomas. It was dusty and needed a thorough cleaning, but it had 4 rooms, a proper kitchen, and windows that let in generous light. She could see their life here, could imagine curtains on those windows and a rug on that floor, and Thomas taking his first steps across these boards. When she came back out, Frank was standing in the yard with Thomas in his arms, pointing at something in the distance. He looked up when he heard her steps. "What do you think?" "I think we can make this a home," Katherine said. The smile Frank gave her was worth every uncertainty, every moment of doubt. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Frank completed the purchase of the ranch with money he had saved over years of careful work. They moved in with almost nothing, their combined possessions barely filling 2 rooms, but they set to work making the place livable. Katherine scrubbed floors and walls while Thomas napped, and Frank repaired the barn and reinforced fences. They worked together in the garden, planting late-season vegetables, and Frank taught Katherine how to handle the 3 horses he had bought from his former employer. At night, they were still careful around each other, Frank sleeping in one room while Katherine and Thomas took the other. They had fallen into an easy partnership during the day, working side by side, sharing meals and conversation, but the physical aspect of their marriage remained unspoken and unaddressed. Katherine was grateful for Frank's patience, but she was also increasingly aware of him, of the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy, of how he smiled at her over morning coffee, of the gentle competence of his hands when he held Thomas. One evening in September, When the heat had finally broken and the air held the first hint of autumn, Katherine was washing dishes after dinner when Frank came up beside her to dry. They worked in companionable silence for a while, and then Frank cleared his throat. "Katherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here? I know this is not what you imagined your life would be. If there is anything I can do to make things better, I want you to tell me." Katherine set down the plate she was holding and turned to face him. "Frank, I am happier than I have any right to be. A month ago I thought I was going to die alone on the prairie. Now I have a home and a partner and a future. You have given me that. Of course I am happy." "But," Frank prompted gently, "but I feel like we are dancing around something. This marriage. We are partners in every way except one, and I do not know if you are waiting for me to give you some kind of sign, or if you have changed your mind about wanting that aspect of our relationship at all." Frank's ears turned red, which Katherine found endearing. "I have not changed my mind. I just do not want to rush you. You have been through so much, and I know you married me out of necessity more than desire. I did not want you to feel obligated. Frank, come sit with me." They moved to the small sofa in the front room, sitting close but not quite touching. Thomas was asleep in his cradle in the bedroom, and the house was quiet except for the tick of the clock Frank had bought from a peddler. "I need to tell you something," Katherine said. "When you found me on the prairie, I had given up. I was certain I was going to die, and my only thought was that Thomas would be alone. Then you were there, and you were so calm and so sure that everything would be all right. You held my baby so I could see his face, and in that moment, you gave me a reason to keep fighting. You have been giving me reasons ever since. Katherine, let me finish. I know I married you for practical reasons. But Frank, this past month, working with you, building this life with you, watching you with Thomas, I have come to care for you. Not out of gratitude, though I am grateful. Not out of obligation. I care for you because you are a good man, because you make me laugh, because you are patient and kind and steady. I do not know if that is love yet, but I think it could grow into love if we let it." Frank reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I've cared for you since the moment I saw you in that wagon, so fierce and frightened and determined to save your baby. I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but Katherine, I am already halfway in love with you. I have been trying not to be, trying to keep it practical like we agreed, but I cannot seem to help it." Katherine felt something warm and bright bloom in her chest. "Then maybe we should stop trying to be so practical." Frank leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Katherine did not want to. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something more. It had been so long since Katherine had been touched with desire, and her body responded with an intensity that surprised her. Frank's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Katherine let herself sink into the embrace, into the warmth and safety of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, even though we are already married." Katherine laughed, slightly giddy. "How does one court their own wife?" "I have no idea, but I am going to figure it out." And he did. Over the next weeks, Frank brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides around the property. He took her on evening walks after Thomas was asleep, pointing out constellations and telling her stories about his childhood in Missouri. He played his harmonica for her, old songs that made her smile, and he listened when she talked about her own past, about her parents and her first marriage, and the dreams she had carried. They grew closer in ways that had nothing to do with physicality and everything to do with genuine connection. Katherine found herself looking forward to Frank's return each evening, found herself missing him during the day when he was out working the land. She caught herself staring at him sometimes, memorizing the line of his jaw or the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. Thomas grew and changed, becoming more alert, beginning to smile at familiar faces. He clearly recognized Frank now, would calm when Frank picked him up, would track him with his eyes across the room. One evening, Frank was holding him and making silly faces, and Thomas laughed, a real belly laugh that delighted them both so much that Frank immediately did it again just to hear it repeated. "He loves you," Katherine said, watching them together. "I love him too," Frank said simply. "He is ours, Katherine. He has always been ours." That night, after Thomas was asleep and they were preparing for bed, Katherine stopped in the doorway between their two rooms. "Frank," he looked up from where he was unlacing his boots. "Yes, I do not want to sleep separately any more." Something flared in Frank's eyes, hot and immediate, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." What followed was tender and careful and absolutely right. Frank treated Katherine as though she were precious, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and willing at every step. It was different from her experiences with David, who had been young and enthusiastic, but not particularly attentive. Frank paid attention to every response, every sigh, adjusting to what she needed. And when it was over, he held her close, their legs tangled together, and whispered into her hair that she was amazing, that he was the luckiest man alive. Katherine fell asleep in her husband's arms, truly her husband now in every sense, and felt something settle in her heart. This was what she had needed, this partnership that had grown into genuine affection and was blossoming into love. The autumn passed in a golden haze of work and growing intimacy. The ranch began to take shape around them. Frank bought cattle, just a small herd to start, and built up their stock of chickens and pigs. Katherine planted a kitchen garden and started learning to preserve food for the winter. She sewed curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed, using scraps of fabric she bought in town, and the house slowly transformed from an empty shell into a home. They went to church in Oklahoma City on Sundays, making the hour-long ride in their wagon, and gradually became part of the community. People were kind, if occasionally curious about their quick courtship, but no one said anything unkind. Katherine reconnected with Mary Collins, and the two women became friends, their babies playing together while they swapped recipes and advice. In November, Katherine received a letter from her sister in Texas, delayed by several mail mix-ups. It was full of concern for Katherine's welfare and urgent invitations to come south before winter. Katherine sat down and wrote back, explaining that she had remarried and was settled in Oklahoma. She tried to convey how happy she was, how this life she had fallen into by accident had become more fulfilling than anything she could have planned. She did not know if her sister would understand, but she hoped so. Winter came, cold and harsh, with snow that piled high and wind that rattled the windows. But the house was snug, the barn was stocked with hay for the animals, and they had plenty of food put by. Frank and Katherine spent the long evenings by the fire, Frank working on leather repairs while Katherine mended or knitted, Thomas playing on a blanket between them. It was peaceful in a way that Katherine had never experienced before, this quiet domestic contentment. One evening in December, with snow falling thick outside the window, Katherine looked up from the tiny sock she was knitting for Thomas and found Frank watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I love you," Frank said. "I know we agreed this would be practical, but Katherine, I am completely in love with you. I have been for months, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Katherine set down her knitting and crossed to where Frank sat, settling into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you too," she said. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid it was too soon, afraid you would think I was just confused or grateful. You are sure? Frank asked, his hands coming to rest on her waist. This is not just because we are snowed in together with no escape. Katherine laughed and kissed him, long and deep and thorough. I am absolutely sure. You are the best man I have ever known, Frank Mackenzie, and I am so grateful that you found me on that prairie. Best day of my life, Frank murmured against her lips. Even though you scared me half to death. They made love there by the fire, slow and sweet, while Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle and the snow continued to fall outside. Afterward, wrapped in a blanket together, Katherine felt completely at peace. This was her life now, this man and this child and this home they were building together. It was not the life she had planned, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. Thomas's first Christmas was a simple affair, but full of joy. Frank carved him a wooden horse, and Katherine sewed him a stuffed bear from scraps of flannel. They went to church on Christmas Eve and came home to a meal of roasted chicken and potatoes, and the apple pie Katherine had learned to make from Mrs. Harrison. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. As winter slowly gave way to spring, their little ranch continued to flourish. The cattle they had bought were thriving, and Frank was able to purchase more. He hired a hand to help with the heavy work, a quiet young man named Peter who proved reliable and hardworking. Katherine's garden began to sprout with the warming weather, and Thomas became increasingly mobile, crawling with determination toward anything that caught his interest. One evening in April, Katherine was preparing dinner when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly that she had to grab the edge of the table to steady herself. Frank was at her side immediately, concern etched on his face. "Katherine, are you all right?" "I think so. Just felt dizzy for a moment." But even as she said it, Katherine was counting back in her mind, calculating dates, and realization dawned with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "Frank, I think I might be pregnant." Frank stared at her for a long moment, and then his face broke into the biggest smile Katherine had ever seen. "Really? Are you sure?" "Not completely, but all the signs are there. We should probably wait a bit longer before we celebrate, but yes, I think so." Frank swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, careful even in his enthusiasm. "This is wonderful. Thomas is going to be a big brother." "Frank, put me down before you make me actually sick," Katherine said. Laughing over the next weeks, the pregnancy became undeniable. Katherine was indeed expecting again, due sometime in November if her calculations were correct. Unlike her pregnancy with Thomas, this one was easier in many ways. She was healthy and well-fed, not burdened by grief and financial worry. She had a partner who doted on her, who insisted she rest when she was tired and brought her tea when her stomach was unsettled. Frank became almost comically protective, to the point where Katherine had to remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. But she found his concern endearing, a testament to how much he cared. He talked to her belly at night, telling the baby about the ranch and Thomas, and how excited they all were to meet the new arrival. Thomas, now almost a year old, was completely oblivious to the changes coming, more interested in his newfound ability to pull himself up on furniture and take tentative steps while holding on. Katherine watched him grow and develop, marveling at how much he had changed in such a short time, how he was becoming his own little person with opinions and preferences, and a surprising amount of stubbornness. Summer came hot and dry, and Katherine spent much of it inside, out of the worst of the heat. She sewed baby clothes while Thomas napped, using the skills her mother had taught her years ago. Frank worked long hours but always came in for lunch, insisting on checking on her, bringing her cool water from the well, making sure she was not overdoing it. In August, they celebrated their first anniversary quietly at home. Frank gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought in town, soft wool in a deep green that brought out her eyes. Katherine gave him a new saddle she had commissioned, his initials tooled into the leather. They put Thomas to bed early and spent the evening on the porch, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed in a year. "A year ago, I was terrified," Katherine admitted, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left but survival for Thomas's sake. I never imagined I could be this happy again." "A year ago I was lonely," Frank said. "I had plans and ambitions, but no one to share them with. I thought that was just how my life would be. Then I found you and everything changed." "You saved me," Katherine said softly. "No," Frank corrected, taking her hand. "We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, and Katherine felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was happiness, real and solid and earned through hardship and choice and commitment. She had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined not to waste a single moment of it. Thomas's first birthday in September was a small celebration with just their little family and Mary Collins with her husband and their 2 children. Katherine made a cake and they sang, and Thomas smashed his piece with both hands, delighted by the mess and the attention. Frank took a photograph, the first they had ever taken, and Katherine treasured it, this proof of their joy. As October turned to November and Katherine's due date approached, Frank became increasingly nervous. He had been present for Thomas's birth, had seen how close Katherine had come to dying, and he was terrified of losing her. Katherine tried to reassure him that this pregnancy was different, that she was stronger now and had access to proper medical care, but she understood his fear. When her labor started on a cold November morning, Frank immediately drove her to Oklahoma City to Dr. Harrison. This time, there was no desperate ride, no fear of dying alone. Katherine labored in the doctor's comfortable bedroom with Mrs. Harrison attending her and Frank holding her hand, and when their daughter was born 6 hours later, healthy and screaming with fury, Frank wept with relief. "She is perfect," Katherine said, exhausted but elated as Mrs. Harrison placed the baby in her arms. "Frank, look at her." Frank touched his daughter's tiny hand with one finger, his face full of wonder. What should we name her? They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her daughter's red face and dark hair, Katherine knew. "Eleanor, after your mother." Frank's eyes filled with fresh tears. Eleanor Mackenzie had died when Frank was 12, and he rarely spoke of her, but Katherine knew he had loved her dearly. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Eleanor Rose Mackenzie." Their daughter, unlike Thomas, was a quiet baby, content to eat and sleep and observe the world with serious dark eyes. Thomas was fascinated by her, wanting to touch her constantly, and Katherine and Frank had to keep a close watch to make sure his enthusiasm did not accidentally harm his sister. But Thomas was surprisingly gentle, and soon he was helping in small ways, bringing Katherine a clean cloth when Eleanor needed changing, singing to her in his toddler babble when she fussed. The winter of 1892 was easier than the one before. They were more established, with better supplies and a house that Frank had insulated more thoroughly. The ranch was doing well enough that they could afford a few small luxuries, and Frank surprised Katherine with a rocking chair for Christmas, beautiful and sturdy, perfect for nursing Eleanor or reading to Thomas. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. Katherine was busy from morning to night, but it was a good busy, full of purpose and love. Frank continued to be a wonderful father, patient with Thomas's endless questions and gentle with Aliner's nighttime wakings. They were a family in the truest sense, bound not just by legal ties but by genuine affection and commitment. As spring approached, and Aliner became more interactive, smiling and cooing at familiar faces, Katherine reflected on how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been alone and terrified, giving birth in a wagon with no hope of survival. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, 2 beautiful children, and a home that was truly hers. One evening in March, after both children were asleep, Frank pulled Katherine onto his lap as they sat by the fire. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is usually dangerous," Katherine teased. Frank smiled but continued. "I want to expand the ranch, buy more land while it is still available. Peter has a brother who is looking for work, and I think we could use the help. If we do this right, we could build something substantial, something to pass down to Thomas and Aliner." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Katherine said. "This ranch is not just surviving anymore, Frank. It is thriving. We should grow it." "We will need to take out a loan for the land," Frank warned. "It is a risk." "Life is a risk," Katherine said, "but it is one worth taking." They borrowed money from the bank in Oklahoma City, using the ranch as collateral, and purchased the adjacent property, nearly doubling their acreage. Peter's brother, Daniel, proved as capable as Peter himself, and with 2 hands working, the ranch's productivity increased dramatically. Frank bought more cattle, and Katherine started raising sheep for wool, which she spun and sold in town. The years passed in a blur of work and joy, and the inevitable challenges of farming and raising children. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed Frank everywhere, learning to ride and rope and handle cattle. Aliner was quieter but no less determined, more interested in the animals than in the traditional skills Katherine tried to teach her. When she was 4, she announced that she was going to be a rancher like her daddy, and neither Katherine nor Frank saw any reason to discourage her. In 1896, Katherine gave birth to their 3rd child, a son they named Benjamin after Frank's father. Ben was a happy baby who laughed at everything and everyone, charming them all with his sunny disposition. Thomas, now 5 and feeling very grown up, took his role as big brother seriously, while Aliner seemed less impressed by the new addition, though she eventually warmed to him. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1898, they had paid off the loan and owned their land outright. They had a solid herd of cattle, a large flock of sheep, and a reputation for quality and fair dealing that brought buyers to their door. Frank had achieved everything he had dreamed of and more, and he made sure Katherine knew that none of it would have been possible without her. One summer evening in 1899, with the children playing in the yard and dinner cooking on the stove, Frank came up behind Katherine and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, comfortable and content. "You ever regret it?" Frank asked quietly. "Marrying me instead of going to Texas?" Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "Never. Not once. Frank, you gave me a life when I thought mine was over. You have loved me and Thomas as though we had always been yours. You have given me more children and a home and a partnership that is everything I could have dreamed of. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Frank said. "I am more than happy. I am fulfilled. I am loved. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Frank kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Katherine melted into him the way she still did after 8 years of marriage. The children, spotting them through the window, made exaggerated gagging sounds, and they broke apart laughing. "Mama and Daddy are kissing again," Thomas announced to his siblings, as though this were a newsworthy event. "Gross," Aliner pronounced, though she was smiling. "Ben, at 3, just wanted to know if dinner was ready." That night, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Katherine and Frank sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars and simply being together. 8 years ago, Katherine had been lost and alone, certain she was dying. Now she had everything she had ever wanted and things she had not known to want. A husband who loved her completely, children who were healthy and happy, a home that was truly theirs. "Thank you," she said quietly into the darkness. "For what?" Frank asked. "For finding me. For stopping when you could have ridden on. For holding Thomas so I could see his face. For giving me a reason to survive." Frank pulled her closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I think we both know I got the better end of that deal. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Mackenzie." "I love you," Katherine said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Frank replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together under the vast Oklahoma sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, the ranch that had started as a desperate solution and had become a thriving legacy. Thomas would inherit it someday, would pass it down to his own children, and they would tell the story of how it began, of a woman giving birth alone on the prairie and a cowboy who stopped to help. But that story was more than just a dramatic beginning. It was about two people who had found each other in impossible circumstances and had chosen to build something beautiful together. It was about partnership and trust and love that grew from necessity into genuine devotion. It was about family, both born and chosen, and about making a home in a harsh land through determination and mutual support. Katherine looked at Frank, at this man who had become her everything, and felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Life had broken her once, had brought her to the very edge of death, but it had also given her this second chance, this beautiful, imperfect, absolutely perfect life. In the distance, a coyote called and one of the horses answered with a soft whinny. The children slept peacefully in their beds, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. The ranch stretched out around them, acres of land they had worked and nurtured into productivity. And Katherine and Frank sat together on their porch, holding each other close, grateful for every moment of the unexpected love story that had saved them both. The future was uncertain, as it always was on the frontier, but Katherine faced it without fear. Whatever came, they would handle it together, as they had handled everything since that August day in 1891, when Frank had held her newborn son so she could see his face. That moment had been the beginning of everything, the first step on a journey neither of them could have anticipated but both were grateful to be taking. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Katherine rested her head on Frank's shoulder and closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she was home, truly home, in every sense of the word. She had survived the impossible, had found love in the most unlikely circumstances, and had built a life worth living. That was enough. That was everything. Years later, when their children were grown and Katherine's hair had gone silver, she would still remember that day on the prairie with perfect clarity. She would remember the pain and the fear and the absolute certainty that she was dying. She would remember the sound of hoofbeats approaching, and the relief of knowing she would not die alone. She would remember Frank's calm voice telling her to push, his gentle hands receiving Thomas into the world, the way he had held her son so carefully, angling him just right so Katherine could see every detail of that tiny, perfect face. And she would remember thinking, even through the pain and exhaustion, that this stranger with kind eyes might just be the answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. She had been right about that, more right than she could have imagined in that desperate moment. Frank Mackenzie had been her salvation, her second chance, her unexpected love. But the miracle was not just that he had saved her life. The miracle was everything that came after, the slow building of trust and partnership and genuine affection. The miracle was learning to love again when she had thought herself incapable of it. The miracle was the family they created together, the home they built, the life they shared. Thomas grew up strong and capable, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Frank aged. He married a teacher from town, a smart woman named Sarah who fit perfectly into their family, and together they gave Katherine and Frank their first grandchildren. Eleanor, true to her childhood declaration, became a rancher, partnering with her brother to expand the operation even further and earning the respect of every cattleman in the territory. Ben, the baby, surprised them all by becoming a lawyer, moving to Oklahoma City but visiting often, always bringing stories and laughter with him. Katherine and Frank aged together, their faces weathering like the wood of their house, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, grateful for every moment they had been given. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold, each generation marveling at the improbable circumstances that had brought them together. But to Katherine and Frank, there was nothing improbable about it. It had always felt inevitable, as though the universe had conspired to bring them together, using tragedy and desperation as the catalyst for something beautiful. They had saved each other, not just in that moment on the prairie but every day since, through the small acts of kindness and support that built a life together. When Frank died in 1924, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 63, Katherine mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given 33 years together, 33 years of partnership and love and building something that would last long after they were gone. She held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again, and that he had made her life beautiful beyond measure. Katherine lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that owed its existence to a chance encounter on a lonely prairie. She died in the house she and Frank had made their home, in the bed they had shared for 3 decades, and her last conscious thought was of that August day in 1891, of being too weak to lift her newborn baby, of a cowboy with kind eyes holding the child so she could see its face. That moment had been the beginning of everything, and as Katherine slipped peacefully into whatever came next, she carried with her the absolute certainty that she had been loved, truly and completely loved, and that her life had mattered. She had survived. She had thrived. She had loved and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask for? The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of the Mackenzie family, a testament to what 2 people can build when they choose to face life together. And if you visit on a quiet evening when the light is fading and the wind sighs across the prairie, you might almost hear echoes of laughter, of children playing, of 2 people who found each other against all odds and made something beautiful from the ruins of what had been. That is the real miracle of Katherine and Frank's story. Not just that they survived, but that they lived, fully and joyfully, embracing the unexpected gift they had been given and nurturing it into something that would outlast them both. Love, real love, is not just about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It is about the daily choice to show up for each other, to support and encourage and simply be present. Katherine and Frank understood that, lived it every day of their marriage, and built a legacy that their descendants still cherish. Their story began with weakness and desperation, with Katherine too exhausted to even hold her newborn child. But it became a story of strength, of two people who found in each other the courage to build a life worth living. Frank held Thomas so Katherine could see his face, and in doing so, showed her that she was not alone, that help existed, that survival was possible. From that single act of kindness grew a love that sustained them through decades of joy and hardship, a love that created family and home and belonging. And in the end, that is what matters. Not how love begins, but how it endures, how it grows, how it transforms two separate lives into one shared journey. Katherine and Frank's journey started on a lonely prairie in Oklahoma in 1891, but it stretched across decades and generations, a testament to the power of choosing love, of choosing partnership, of choosing to believe that even in the darkest moments, hope exists. Their story is one of survival and second chances, of unexpected blessings and hard-won happiness. It is a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most impossible circumstances, and that love, when it is real and true and tested by adversity, can build something that lasts forever.